All right, good morning, everyone. All right, we're going to get started. It's 10:05. All right, so I want to welcome everyone. Thanks for driving out here in the weather, and I know it was not easy to get here, but thank you very much. So first of all, I want to talk about safety precautions here. If there's an emergency that might happen, there are 2 exits to the left and to the right, and you just follow everybody out of the building. So now I want to introduce the team here that will help manage and host this workshop today. So I'm Christine Sotelo. I'm the program manager for California ELAP. To my right is Andrew Hamilton. He's an environmental scientist working in the Program Development Enforcement Unit. And then we have our senior staff, Jacob Oaxaca, who is the senior in that Program Development Enforcement Unit. And then we have Catlin Bloom, who also works for Jacob. And then we have our counsel from the Office of Chief Counsel at the State Water Board, who advises us in all that we do. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple things to you all. These regulations are really important to all of us, and it's really essential to have a solid, functional program. New accreditation standards, as you know, were something that the expert review panel and even the board has identified as a crucial initiative that we have to get adopted and put in place. This has been a collective effort by all of us. It's been almost 3 years since we released our first draft, and now we're at the 3rd draft. So we've released it to the public, and we've taken a lot of your comments to heart. And every iteration of the draft has taken all of your comments, and we've integrated them into the draft. So we're really looking forward to listening to what you have to say today and take in as much as we can that makes sense for the program and helps us improve and move us forward into a functional, solid program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jacob and the team to start the workshop. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christine. And again, thank you everybody for joining us here. My name is Jacob Oaxaca, the supervisor for the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit. Due to the setup of the room here, myself and the staff will be sitting up at the dais. We don't want to make it seem like we're so far away from you and whatnot, but these tables won't turn, and so it is what it is. So we for the rest of the workshop, we will be up here, but this is a nice friendly group, and so hopefully you guys can hear us and see us. Feel free to speak up if you have any kind of if there's anything that preventing you from hearing or seeing what we're talking about today. So I'm gonna step back over here, and then we'll kind of keep going with the program. Thank you. Just do a quick mic check. Can everybody hear from back there? Great. Okay. So for today's agenda, we'll go ahead and start off with some information just to kind of get everybody back up to speed, since it's been a while since we held our last workshop, and just kind of we'll talk about the draft regulations development, and then also what to expect moving forward into the formal rulemaking process. I'll talk a little bit about the responding to comments, and then Andrew and I will be giving a draft overview of the 3rd preliminary draft, and then we will be opening it up for comment from those of you here in the room. And then lastly, we'll end the workshop with some next steps in terms of how we'll be continuing to move forward. So for those of you who've been going through this process with us. This may be just a refresher for you, and for the others, it's just to kind of let you know where we are at in this draft regulations development. Early on in the process, we started over here in this preliminary activities phase, and that's something I kind of really want to point out, that this is we're definitely still in the preliminary activities phase, where we're developing our draft regulations, which will be included in our formal rulemaking process, in our formal rulemaking package. For those, just to kind of start from the very beginning here, we selected an accreditation standard through a collaborative process with the stakeholders. And then we went ahead and released our first preliminary draft regulation text. And over time, the last, I think Christine said, 2 or so years, we have kind of been working with the community and have actually released multiple drafts, and now we're at the third draft. As part of the preliminary activities, we are having these stakeholder workshops. And once we have kind of gone through this stage of the process, my staff and I will get back and prepare our draft rulemaking package. This will include the proposed draft regulation text, the initial statement of reasons, and the economic and fiscal impact statement. Once we have completed that, we will submit the package to the Office of Administrative Law. After that, the Office of Administrative Law will issue a notice of a publication, which begins the formal rulemaking process. So just to kind of summarize here is, again, we are in the preliminary activities phase. And so all of these, all of your comments that we have received over the past drafts have really been helpful for us into getting to this point here where we can, where we can prepare our proposed draft regulation text. A little bit more on the development of the text. The first preliminary draft, which was released to the entire laboratory community, resulted in numerous comments, which we ultimately accepted approximately about 75% of those comments. Those comments and suggestions were incorporated or manifested into the second preliminary draft, which we went ahead and released a targeted release to our LTAC members. And the point of that was really to just continue molding our draft, our regulation text. We wanted to get input from your LTAC member representatives to make sure that we were really on the right path, that we corrected a lot of the just glaring possibly spelling errors, or even get feedback from them on what might help us to offer more clarity in the text. And so it was a specific targeted release to the members of the LTAC, and we received almost, more than 200 comments from your LTAC representatives. And from there, we evaluated the comments and suggestions and accepted approximately 60% of those comments, which leads us now to the third preliminary draft, which we are all here to discuss. This again was released to the entire laboratory community back in December of 2018. And as with the first two drafts, all applicable comments and suggestions will be incorporated into the proposed draft regulation text. This is which will go out as part of the full regulatory package for public comment. So here's a graphic here to kind of just get everybody on board and know where we are, and once we enter into the formal rulemaking process. Again, these dates are subject to change, but as I mentioned in the previous slide, once the notice of publication by OAL goes out, that begins the formal rulemaking process. That will be followed by a 45-day public comment period. And then at which time we will also be during the 45-day public comment period, we will also be holding a public hearing, which will be held at the State Water Board workshop. And this really, we really want to highlight that this is another opportunity for the community to come and offer comments both to ELAP and to the State Board. After that process has gone through, we kind of shift into finalizing the formal rulemaking package. And this here is the stage where we will include the formal response to comments. We then go in front of the board again to present our rulemaking package, our text, and present to the board for a resolution on our regulations. Following that, we will submit our final rulemaking package to OAL, who then reviews, and if approved, the rulemaking package gets transmitted to the Secretary of State for filing. Shortly after that, or depends on how that process goes, we are looking into the regulations becoming effective on January 2020. A quick comment here, a quick slide on how we've been responding to comments. As I mentioned, throughout each of these preliminary drafts, we have received numerous comments, and it's been something that we've found very valuable and beneficial to this process of preparing our proposed draft regulation text. And it's really been used for us as a development tool. So in each of these iterations, we have been responding to comments by making those changes and manifesting those in the following draft. As I mentioned also, the final rulemaking package will include the formal response to comments that are made during the rulemaking process. Now I'd like to switch into why we're all here, which is going to be the workshop. And I just wanted to kind of put out some, how we want to move forward with the rest of the presentation. So we really see this as an opportunity to listen and hear your comments on this third preliminary draft. The way we would like to structure it is that ELAP will summarize each section of the regulation text, and then we will open the floor to comments. Now we will go through section by section, and that's so that we can, in a chronological order, and so that we can kind of move forward in an organized fashion as we take our notes and listen to what you have to say. Because we are webcasting this, it's very important that all of the commenters come up and use the 2 mics that are located here in the room. And also please identify your name, your organization, and the specific section of the text that you are commenting on. So with that, we will now switch over into the overview of the draft regulation text. And as I mentioned earlier, Andrew and I will be tag teaming this and kind of switching back so that you just don't have to hear one person talking all day. So I will begin with Article 1, which are the definitions. And these are definitions that are used differently or that do not exist in the 2016 Tni standard. I want to just kind of stop here and really kind of point out one of the definitions, which is a newer definition that has kind of been added since preliminary draft 1 and now into draft 3, and that's the definition for assessment agency. Now this definition is used throughout the text, and it's really used when we're and primarily used when we're referring to on-site assessments. And it should really be understood that assessment agency can mean ELAP or any entity that is approved by ELAP to conduct laboratory assessments. And so, I just want to clarify and make the point that this is not one or the other, that in the way that we've used the definition through the term throughout the text, it can really apply to either ELAP or again, any entity that is approved by ELAP to conduct the laboratory assessments. And just to kind of give one example of a term that is used in the TNI standard, for example, the fields of accreditation. You won't find that in our list of definitions because that is part of we're using the definition that was included in the 2016 TNI standard. I won't go over all of the definitions, so at this point, just wanted to give you, just highlight a few of the terms, and now I'd like to open it to you, the community here, to go ahead and come up and provide any comments that you have regarding Article 1.
It's on. Yeah. All right. Good morning. Adam Borchard with the Association of California Water Agencies, and I'm speaking on behalf of AQUA and the California Municipal Utilities Agency. With regards to the definition of assessment agency, CMUA and AQUA were discussing that given that there might be assessments by ELAP and then assessments by third parties, it might be useful to perhaps bifurcate the definition to provide for a definition that indicates assessment by ELAP and the assessment by a third-party entity. Thank you.
All right, is there, oh, one more.
And I just want to say, feel free to take your time to kind of put together your thoughts. We have a small group here, and so there's not, really a great rush. If we do kind of move on to another article, please note that at the end of the presentation here, as we've gone through all 7 articles, we will have an opportunity again for those who may have heard something brought up in other comments or didn't have the opportunity to comment the first time around. So there'll be another chance, but and if you are working on some thoughts and we happen to move forward to the next section, feel free to just signal to me that maybe you need a few more extra minutes and we can accommodate that.
Hi, Jacob. Good morning. Josie Tellers from City of Davis. I'm also representing interests of Civic Lab committee members. Before I proceed with the definition, I just wanted to, if it's okay, to comment on your initial presentation. Given that the comments for the third prelim draft will be part of the proposed text regulation, is it possible for us to ask a 2-week extension for submitting comment for the third prelim draft? Primarily because when it was released, it's in the beginning of the holiday break for most people, so we lost some times. And if the comment that's going to be submitted will be part of that proposed text regulation, we would like to have a little bit more time to spend reviewing the third draft regulation in detail. That's one comment. And before I forget, again, given the presentation you have, in the draft preliminary rulemaking process that you posted, actually it's in the handout that's available to everybody. Given that there's a big time that will be elapsed from the adoption date to effective date of the final regulations for the state of California, somewhere as we go to the draft regulation, we're going to be talking about and requesting, again, before I forget, to change reference to adoption date to be the effective date as the marker for laboratories to start complying. In the application package, I think that's where the adoption date was the marker instead of the effective date. Something to keep in mind. Now, going on the definition, in the regulation, there's a lot of reference to environmental samples. Sorry.
I'd just like to make a quick clarification. So these regulations, in addition to updating our accreditation standards, also deal with other sections of, the how ELAP runs and other parts of what's required by the laboratory community. And so the effective date of the regulations, is the start date of these new regulations. I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but as far as the Tni part of things, there will be an implementation window for that part, a 3-year implementation window. Or
Right.
we're proposing a 3-year implementation
Yes,
window.
and understood. But the marker for that is from the adoption date, not the effective date. So, yeah, and there's a big difference between timeline for that. Going back to subject at hand, Article 1 on definition, we reserve to add more requests when we send the written comments from our members. However, I would like to bring forth that there's a lot of reference to environmental samples within the regulations, so I would like to request that environmental samples be defined, included in the definition section. Thank you.
Mindy Boley, City of Vacaville. I'm also the vice chair for the CWEA State Lab Committee and an LTAC member. I just have a couple of comments on the definitions that have been brought up. Is that in D for citation, and then again in J with dismissed, is that the definitions we have listed here tend to vary slightly from what is listed, or it's just a little bit inconsistent, what is in the actual health and safety code that already has definitions for both of these words. And so I would just advise that we make sure that those aren't conflicting and that those kind of match up perfectly for both of them. If it applies to, health and safety code obviously applies to ELAP regs and everything. So I just want to get that noted. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Debbie Webster with the Central Valley Clean Water Association. And I actually have just a general comment, a little bit following up on Josie, is it given the timing of the issue, timing of release, to coordinate getting our multiple agencies that are trying to participate and understand the regulations, it really we were not able to meet and to even begin discussions until this week. And so we do reserve the right to make some major comments as things come out, because it's just, we asked ahead of time for time, and that was not given. We'd like to get some more time. We've been trying to work with you on this issue, and so that would be helpful. But another issue is that in the early regulations, TNI provided at least the opportunity to look at what at that time what were proposed standards. They weren't completely adopted at that point, and we have quite a few members, including Civiqua itself, who did get a TNI membership just to be able to look at the regulations, but was never given the material as part of that, even though that was part of the membership area, we need to be able to, our agencies need to be able to look and see what's being required. So when we were even meeting yesterday, it wasn't like everybody around the room had a book and was able to look and say, oh yeah, this is what it says in TNI, I'm okay with that. And so we really need the ability to access what is being asked for us, and that needs to be readily available. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for those initial comments. We will now move on to Article 2.
All right, guys, can you, can you hear me if I just stay right here? Everyone good in the back? Josie? She's not even paying attention. Okay. So this article is about accreditation requirements. It's a little more extensive than the first article. So let me get through it, and then we'll have a comment period afterwards. So 64802.00 is the accreditation criteria. So these are the criterion that a laboratory must meet to obtain accreditation from ELAP. So it's on a very fundamental level. What criteria, if you were looking for accreditation, what criteria do you have to meet? 64802.05 is the application package. So these are the items that a laboratory must submit to give proof that they are meeting the criteria of 64802. And it would be included in an application package. Now, following sections in Article 2 have more detailed explanation of the criteria, the accreditation criteria. So 64802.10 starts with quality systems. This is new to ELAP. This is a new concept, a new requirement. It's not contained in our current regulations. This is where ELAP is going to use the quality system requirements of the 2016 TNI standards. So this is the first reference to TNI and the 2016 TNI standards. Now there's reference throughout the text of requirements using referencing 2016 TNI standards. But this is the first time that it shows up in the text. ELAP selected the 2016 TNI standard with 2 exceptions, that should be noted, with support by the expert review panel, state agency partners, and the state board. Now, it's also important to note, and Josie talked about this 3-year implementation grace period. So any reference to a requirement or a clause that includes 2016 TNI standards will not be required until 3 years from the adoption date. Now, we can talk about the effect. That is a comment that we will include. But that's what the text says at this moment. But on the date of adoption or the effective date of the proposed regulations, the quality system requirements that are noted are very similar to the current regulations quality assurance program. So really, there won't be that much change until the effective required or effective date of the TNI requirements. Moving on. So 64802.15 is describing the fields of accreditation. This section talks about how the field of accreditations are determined and where the list of field of accreditations will be located. Now, it's important to note that the field of accreditations are not determined by ELAP. They're determined by the state agency partners' needs for the regulatory purposes. So we get that information from them, and that's what we will publish on our website as our list of field of accreditations. And they will be updated according to the needs of our state agency partners. 64802.20 is talking about the proficiency testing requirements. So the requirements and frequency for testing PT samples. ELAP, as part of the exception, is going to retain the one PT sample per field of accreditation per year. Now, this is a deviation from the Tni standards. The 2016 Tni standards requires 2 PTs per year, but ELAP is not going to be requiring that. Also included in this section are the required actions that a laboratory needs to take when they fail to achieve an acceptable score on a PT. This is important because this wasn't really detailed very well in our current regulations, so we wanted to have a detailed explanation of what is required from a laboratory if this does occur. 64802.25 is discussing the requirements on on-site assessments, the requirements and frequency. It should be noted that the on-site assessments will be required every 2 years. This is a change from the previous 2 drafts where ELAP was proposing an on-site assessment every 3 years. This change was made in response to comments from LTAC and the laboratory community, and they felt that on-site assessments should be still every 2 years. And that's just an overview of Article 2, and with that, we'll take comments on Article 2.
Hi, my name is Stephen Clark. I'm the Vice President at Pacific Ecorisk, which has a laboratory services and that would be held on compliance under these regulations. I'm also an LTAC member and the chair of LTAC. One of the items I'd like to comment on behalf of at least being an LTAC member is 64802.15 under Fields of Accreditation, item C. Indicates that ELAP publishes the Fields of Accreditations on their website, and that the Fields of Accreditations tables are updated as needed by publishing a revised Fields of Accreditation table on the website. One of my concerns there is that it seems to lack a connection to the Technical Advisory Committee. And as those of us, Jacob and Christine, you know that sometimes regulations come out and they require a particular laboratory service, maybe reporting limits, maybe even a new analyses. And I'd like, because of the challenges that the lab community has seen trying to comply with new regulations that come out that haven't connected with ELAP, I'd like to make sure that LTAC is cited in here as a contributing party to newly released Fields of Accreditation, so that we can serve in our role in reaching out to the lab community, identifying capabilities prior to just something coming up. I mean, hypothetically, this reads as ELAP can just post something that's new up on the website, and labs would have to comply. That connection to LTAC, I think, is critical to ensure that capabilities are there. Secondarily, there's nothing about the notification process. So definitely the website's the place for this, an update, but communications to the laboratories that would make them aware of Fields of Accreditation is lacking from the item C. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Diane Anderson. I'm with Apple Laboratories in Clovis, California. I'm the technical director there, and I'd like to comment on 64802.15, no, I'm sorry, 0.20, proficiency testing. H, if a laboratory doesn't achieve acceptable score, what the laboratory needs to do is notify ELAP within 30 days and then take corrective action and then achieve an acceptable score on a subsequent proficiency testing study. I think there should be a time frame there because it could conceivably be a year before they rerun that sample again.
Mindy Boley again, City of Vacaville. I guess I want to second Stephen's request as far as having LTAC involved when the fields of accreditation are updated. But even more so than that is that it seems like there definitely has to be some form of public process in that. Even though fees are not included in here, historically, ELAP fees have always been associated with either fields of testing, fields of accreditation, somewhere along those lines. There needs to be a process that says that, well, the state agency partners now want to divide these ones that becomes, well, I was certified for one field of testing, now it's two, now I'm having to pay double fees for this or that. There just needs to be some form of process that isn't, or something written in that just isn't, well, now we can make it that every single test is its own field of testing and now your fees are, through the roof on that sense. So again, I know fees aren't totally included in this, but just something that is a public process on that and not just that ELAP is doing this now, deal with it. So, thank you.
Debbie Webster, Central Valley Clean Water Association. I have a question actually for you. As you look at section 8, let me see. Let me make sure I've got this right. As you look at the quality manual, what you have is a quality manual. Can you identify what changes, or if there are any, that you see from current practice?
Can you please identify the section?
I think I am looking at 64802.1, and then it looks like B. Is that right, guys? Thank you.
And your question?
The question is can you identify what changes there are in this based upon current practice?
I would propose that if we, again, the format here is really just to listen to your comments. I don't know if we want to get advice from council here as to if we should take those type of questions or.
Sure. I mean, I think we can describe that generally what's being required here is just more specific. I think what's in our regs currently is just a requirement for quality assurance manual. And this just sets out the details of what that is supposed to incorporate. So it's just more detailed, but I think the intent is that it's similar to what should be occurring for those documents now.
Okay, and the reason why I asked this question, just to give you kind of a heads up on this, is this actually really highlights the difference between an effective date and an adoption date. So you have a requirement that this be submitted as part of an adoption, but there may be a difference between this and when the regulations actually become effective, if they ever do. And so when you have requirements like this in between before something's really effective, it creates a quandary and a problem with our agencies. And so therefore, again, this kind of drives home the idea of effective dates are more appropriate than adoption dates.
Thank you very much.
This is Raji Subramanian, City of Roseville. I want to also add on to Steve, I'm not Steve. Stephen and Mindy's comment about including LTAC in the updates of the FOAs and the lab notification, making it a collaborative process. Plus also, I guess there should be some kind of a time frame when these become effective as the new updates. So are these going to be the ones that labs will start using at the next renewal date? How does it work? When do these new FOAs, if they have been set up, become effective? This goes also into, I guess, your PT, because you're using those particular, when you do your PT studies, you have to use the exact wording as it says in, let's see. So you have, it says that, let's see, 12. It's harder when you want your, so it's 64802.20, and it is 2D, I believe, where it says that you have to report in such a way that analytical results for FOPT matches FOA offered by ELAP. So if you change the FOAs and your PTs have been reported one way, is that going to be a problem? So that's one thing I had. With the PT results also, I guess the same section, and it's going to be F now. It says to maintain accreditation, you have to do a PT within 12 months from the accreditation year date in year 1 and 90 days prior to your expiration date. That's a little confusing, because if you're saying within 90 days prior to the expiration date, isn't that the time frame in which you have to send in your application? So if you only do it then, you don't have your results in time. So maybe that needs to be clarified a little bit more in terms of the time frame. And I guess in 64802.20, I believe K should be embedded in H as an option so that it's clearer instead of it being at the end of the section.
Josie, for any future comments, please come up to the mic. Thank you.
I think I'll let somebody else go on before I.
No. Actually, I just wanted to add that what she's saying also answers Diane's request. Thank you.
You'll have to speak into the mic, Josie, for those who are not here.
What Raji just said, moving H or moving K to H, also answers Diane's question earlier.
Stephen Clark again. Do we have to introduce ourselves every time, Jacob? Okay.
Yes, please.
Pacific ECRIS LTAC member. Adding on to 64802.20 proficiency testing, item F2, I'm a bit confused as well in terms of this within 90 days of expiration date of your accreditation. This works perfectly for us because DMR QA work starts typically, you plan for it in the late winter, and that's a PT provision that is commonly applied in the state of California. Typically get your samples in the spring, get your evaluations done, get your results by maybe mid to late summer. And our application's not due until the 3rd to 4th quarter. So we'd be able to accomplish that. I don't know how a party would be able to accomplish that if their package was due to you, say, in June. They'd have to then go find a different PT provision group based upon this within 90 days. You must have, within 90 days prior to the expiration date of accreditation in year 2, you must have achieved an acceptable score and a minimum of 1 PT. So this doesn't seem to sync up, unless I'm wrong, the way I'm reading it, doesn't seem to sync up with the annual PT work that I believe virtually all labs do, especially with getting down to a single PT in the standard. I think almost all laboratories will be following with the DMR QA release. And so this would almost force a whole bunch of different laboratories based upon their renewal window to be soliciting timelines and PTs from providers that aren't kind of in the standard window that's currently being done in. Like I said, for my lab works just fine because of when our application is due, but I think for many laboratories, you're kind of forcing a lot of effort. In addition, I think there's a greater benefit to having PTs done in one foul swoop because it adds more data to the data set for the PT provider to be able to evaluate cutoffs for acceptable, non-acceptable ranges too. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you. Just gonna go ahead and pause here a little bit because I want to just clarify that these two requirements in F2 are really essentially what's going on now. I mean, in year one, you get accredited. Then in that first year, again, to maintain accreditation in year one of the accreditation period, you have to complete one PT. The second year, which would be the year two of the accreditation period, 90 days before expiration of the certificate, which coincides with the application due date, is when the PT has to be included in that application package. So I, the reason I just kind of wanted to stop here because if that's not clear, maybe we can, as a community and as individuals, if you can formulate your comments to help us understand what's getting lost in translation here.
This is Mindy again. I think it is just the wording on that where it says within 90 days. And really what you need to have is at least 90 days prior to, or something along those lines that you need to have that other one done. So the second time you only have 9 months to do it, where the first year you have a full 12 months. So I think, yeah, changing the wording, at least something with that.
So if we changed it to at least 90 days prior, that would make sense for you.
Yeah, because
Okay.
that
Okay.
would have that you have to have the PTs done before you submit your
Yes,
application.
that's what we mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this one just kind of makes it sound like you need to do it within that 90-day window, which
Okay.
we know is not really what you want.
okay.
but-
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Easy fix.
All right. I'm glad we went ahead and stopped here and kind of tackled that one. So thank you guys very much.
Hi again, Jacob. Josie Tellers. In this article, there's a lot of reference about statutes and regulations as well as interim certificate. I would like to request that those two be defined and included in the definition section. Please note that the regulations that we're going to be finalizing is going to be helpful for us. And if we can do it as much to a format that it's user-friendly to the laboratories, then it will be greatly appreciated. Further, regarding the assessment, on-site assessment, it's clear that there are two fees associated. One is if OSA is done by ELAP, and one if an assessing agent or entity does the assessment. It will also be helpful to have a request is to provide us a guidance of which body, is it ELAP or OSA that we have to contact depending on our scope of work. Because essentially, you're putting now the responsibility to the laboratories to make arrangement with ELAP, to make arrangement with the third-party assessor. It would be good to have a guidelines from ELAP on which one, where's the list of approved assessing agents and what can they do for us. And hopefully this is my last comment. In as much as it's clear what we need to do and there is penalty if we fail to comply, there's no provision on what if there's a delay in ELAP. I think I only saw one portion, but if we submit a package and there's a delay and the time is running out, there's no appeal process for us. It's not spelled out. In the previous Title 22, there was an appeal process, and I think it seems that it's lost, or we just don't know what to expect, pretty much. You know what to expect from us by the regulation that you outline here, but the what if from ELAP, we don't have that. Thank you.
Hi, Adam Borchard again with the Association of California Water Agencies and also on behalf of California Municipal Utilities Agencies. First, I want to echo support for Mr. Clark and Ms. Bully's comments regarding 64802.15C regarding fields of accreditation having a connection to LTAC, and also what the processes will be for noticing changes on the website. Additionally, for section 64802.25 with regards to on-site assessments, for subdivision I, it might be useful to also include clarification when there is an error or procedure by a third-party assessor. So, for example, I could read, unless otherwise approved by ELAP, if a scheduled on-site assessment is not conducted within 6 months from the scheduled assessment date and the delay is not a result of ELAP or a third-party assessor's error procedure, accreditation shall not be denied, suspended, or revoked. So adding third-party assessor would be one recommendation. Secondly, with regards to interim certificates, so 64802.25J currently doesn't allow ELAP to extend an interim certificate in the event of a lapse of certification as a result of action or inaction by ELAP or by a third-party assessor. So it also might be useful to include an additional subdivision J3, an interim certificate is renewable and shall be valid for 1 year at the discretion of ELAP staff. Let's see. And then a couple more comments with regards to third-party assessors, and this might be something that could be clarified in Article 1 in Section 64801. We think it's important that the third-party assessors are vetted or somehow assessed by LTAC members, given the fact that if they're being used to assess laboratories instead of ELAP, it's important that they have good quality assurance. And then my last comment, and by the way, I will include all these in my written comments that we will submit. I'll just read these questions here. In regards to third-party assessors, how will ELAP process approve assessments by third-party assessors? How will ELAP resolve misassessment deadlines as a result of a third party's action or inaction? And how will ELAP reconcile disputes between laboratories and third-party assessors? Would ELAP act as a mediator or contract with a mediator? So those are some additional questions that could probably use some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie Webster with Civica. On the on-site assessment of 6480225, we had a couple questions and kind of clarifications again. In Section C, it says that the laboratory is responsible for scheduling an on-site assessment through ELAP or third-party assessments, and especially as it relates to ELAP and the scheduling, is it the making the contact in order to schedule it, or is it that we're required that there's going to be staff available to do that? And with that same area, sorry about that, on Section I of that same section, it seems like the concern that we talked about is that it seems like if the date on there is based upon if ELAP, if your schedule is not conducted. And the concern that we always have with regulations is that we can only do what we're in control of. We don't have the ability to control ELAP. We don't have the ability to control different areas. Can we get another assessor outside? Yes, it's delays. You're talking about timing that is still pretty tight. And what happens in these cases where ELAP is not doing and not coming, and your time frame for that assessment is beyond a year, is outside the time frames. What do you do with that? And in that same vein, is within these regulations, there's a lot of shalls as it relates to the laboratory community, which I do understand, but there's no shalls as it relates to ELAP. It's ELAP will. And as you know, that carries a different regulatory weight. And so we really feel like, as an accrediting body, that you guys have a responsibility to live up to your part of the deal, and to make sure that, you know, if we, for example, on C, if we call to schedule an assessment, that there's going to be an availability in order to get that assessment within a certain time frame, because we cannot just continue to be hanging. Also, on section F, within that section, in F3, I think that there's a little bit of could be a little bit of confusion, and I don't have specific language in there, where it basically says that your root cause analysis, after 3 years, that then becomes it. And I think what you're trying to say is, after 3 years, submittal of that is what becomes the problem. The way that the first section, though, reads potentially is that your root cause analysis, even if you gave it, is going to be invalid 3 years from when you, after 3 years, again, it talks about the effective, not the effective date, the adoption date. This is based upon this. Again, having that so that the timing are right, not that anything that you've already submitted is invalid, but anything that you have to submit from a point on becomes effective. So to watch the language with that.
Okay, I'd like to again pause here for just 2 clarifications. Starting with section I, that is also something that is currently in our existing regulations, and what that is really saying is that if ELAP were to have scheduled an on-site assessment and the laboratory continues to delay or pushes back for greater than 6 months, that again is not something that ELAP can control. That's something that's in the control of the laboratories. And so that's really what that is intended to address, is that ELAP will work with the laboratory to have that schedule. But if the laboratory is unnecessarily delaying and requesting multiple rescheduling, at some point after 6 months, then that becomes something that we have to address.
Okay, and so that area might benefit from clarification on with regard to what you just said, because it's not clear.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we have heard that through each of these rounds of comments, and it's continued to be the same, because that's something that we have in our existing regulations, but we're hearing it again, and so we'll look into that. And then a quick clarification on F1. Currently, there in our existing regulations and under F1, there's no direction to the laboratories as to what would entail a root cause analysis. So under F3, the proposed TNI standard does include information on what how a root cause analysis would be conducted and performed. And so what F1 is saying, that within that 3-year implementation window, you have to do a root cause analysis. After those 3 years, then the proposal is that you would then follow what the TNI standard includes as regards to a root cause analysis.
And I think that was the intention. The wordings, though, it's that basically when it says the subsection F1 above will be invalid from adoption, to me it was unclear as whether or not your root cause analysis would be invalid,
okay,
or that your ability to submit a root cause analysis that is not consistent with the 2016 TNI standard would be that. So that's what I'm saying.
That's
is
where
the
the-
clarity, it would help with some additional clarity there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Diane Anderson, Apple Laboratories, also an LTAC member. In 64802.25C, maybe that could be reworded to say, rather than the laboratory is responsible for scheduling an on-site audit, the laboratory could be responsible for requesting an on-site audit. And at that point, I think I'd take I and put it under C. I think the issue here is the laboratory needs to request the on-site audit within an amount of time where ELAP could actually get on-site for that audit. So I think perhaps a time frame there would help. And then the laboratory could schedule an on-site assessment through a third-party assessment agency because they would actually be in control at that point.
Just go ahead and speak now, Jacob. That's okay. You were taking
Apologies,
notes.
yeah.
But I'm getting a sense, and I have a little bit of a sense of this too, a little concern. Stephen Clark, Pacific Icarus, LTAC member, that there's outside of your agency, there's a history of, with the old agency, of engagement, communication, execution, follow through, right? And I know you and Christine and your staff are working diligently to resolve that. So I think from the context of the on-site assessments, there's some level of angst in the lab community about, we've got our obligations, but if you don't fulfill your obligations, then, it looks like it's all on us in the regs. Secondarily, the prospect of on-site assessments being done by third-party accrediting bodies, there are a good number of them. There's been discussions about an approved list from ELAP. There have been comments in the room today about those being engaged through LTAC. It's going to take a while for the dust to settle in California in that regard. Somewhere around 400 to 500 laboratories may need an external third-party accrediting body, 400 or so, I think. And so it's going to be a lot of effort by the private industry that serves that market to get bases out here in California, facilities, organizations, and properly staffed and trained people here in California. That's a large uptick in the national market for on-site assessments. So not only is there some concerns and some level of reciprocity that we're seeking for in the regulations in terms of if we do our job but others can't do theirs, what's the protection for the lab community? And others might be ELAP if you're doing the on-site assessment, or it might be the third-party assessors. So maybe a little bit of a satellite kind of concept on maybe where some of these concerns might be coming from.
That's very insightful. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Mindy again. I just have a follow-up question to that. Is there a set plan right now as far as going along, which I know we talked about like months, maybe a year ago now, time's blur, but as far as that LTAC assessors will only do, or not LTAC, ELAP assessors will only do up to a certain level of technology, and then anything above that will have to go to a third party, or is that all still getting reworked with ELAP as far as who, are ELAP assessors going to be able to assess every lab out there, or does that make sense?
Hi, this is Christine Sotelo. So yes, that still is the case. We don't have enough qualified ELAP assessors, but all of that will be discussed in the fee structure work group, because that's how we are structuring the cost to go out to third party for the laboratories. So that is still the philosophy that we're following.
Thank you.
So sorry, I'm going to ask another question because in this Debbie Webster with Civiqua, one of the things that keeps on coming up, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in I think the next section, but start date versus completion date, and when it is. I know that you want the new regulations to become effective at a certain date, but if you've got someone that is accredited based upon the old date, the old materials, the old areas, is their accreditation going to continue to be effective until they have to renew? Or is it that, hey, if you hadn't changed everything, so you're going to get basically every lab in there, if you haven't changed everything to that point, everything that you've done or operated, if it hasn't been to the TNI standard, you now are completely out of compliance. And again, as I look at some of these things where you talk about something becoming invalid after that, it is a question of, is all the materials and the accreditation, what all is becoming invalid? Is it your accreditation, or is it that after this point, these areas are sunsetting, and upon new application, you will have to meet these requirements? It's a clarity issue. I love the answer, but it's a clarity issue also.
Yes, and I what I'm hearing is really just a compliance path, and it seems like that's something, you know, along the lines of what Mr. Clark was saying, is just that information would be really welcomed by the community and helping you guys to understand a lot of just clarifying what would be required once these become effective. And so we could look into just how to communicate that to the community outside of, you know, just putting it in the regulations, but just giving you guys that information so that you're able to prepare and prepare yourself in your lab.
Well, and I also think it becomes really important on what kind of comments that we do make, because if all of a sudden everything you've been operating under becomes invalid the day that you're there, and now you're waiting for a new accreditation, which if you've got, you know, 700, I'm looking at you guys, 700 plus, is that the right? I can't read. Okay, 700 plus labs, maybe half of them, maybe a third of them, you know, are already under the TNI system, or maybe less than that. You know, what happens with the remaining 2/3 or half or whatever? It is a matter of regulation too, because there are enforcement areas. There are we are working to. I represent a community that is mandated to comply with their permits and has national impacts and complete monetary impacts, and so there's a lot of trickle down. It becomes incredibly important.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to Article 3. And so this is Article 3, types of accreditation. So for completeness and a bit of clarity, what we have done is we have consolidated, pardon me, the 4 types of accreditation that ELAP offers into one article. And you'll see these here: initial accreditation, renewal accreditation, reciprocity accreditation, and amendment accreditation. For initial accreditation, 64808.00, these are the requirements for new laboratories that are coming into the program for them to obtain an initial accreditation. This is a lab that doesn't have current ELAP accreditation, and so we the intent here was to provide clarity as to what would be required to obtain that initial accreditation. Under 64808.05, we have the requirements to renew accreditation, which also include the deadline for submitting renewal applications and penalties for late submittals. Now, I did want to point out here that ELAP previously explored the idea of having a renewal window where the idea was that we would accept all renewal applications during a 3-month window. However, based on the comments that we received, it was very clear that this was not well received by the laboratory community. And as such, we will now be moving forward, or we're proposing to continue with our existing process where the applications for renewal applications are going to continue to be due 90 days prior to the individual lab's expiration certificate date. Reciprocity accreditation, these are pretty straightforward, the requirements and the conditions for accreditation by reciprocity. And under amendment accreditation, what we've gone through and what we've tried to do is just add the detail for the laboratories to really know what would be required under the various ways that a laboratory may amend their accreditation. So this is a quick high-level overview. And so with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for comments.
Stephen Clark, Pacific Eco-Risk and LTAC member. There are 4 accreditation frameworks here, depending upon the status of the laboratory, and I'd like to comment on 64808.10 on reciprocity. This is consistent with the communication I've had that is pending with ELAP, and what I've understood in the past, or the current regulations identify that reciprocity is not an option for laboratories not in California. 64808.10 identifies also similarly that for laboratories physically located outside of the state of California, that this reciprocity section is applicable to them. The distinguishing factor between the application packet for a renewal packet and a reciprocity packet is the dependence of the on-site assessment that would be done for a laboratory that might be certified by an external accrediting body. So for example, in a renewal accreditation, you have to schedule an OSA. For a reciprocity accreditation, the narrative suggests that the OSA that was done by the accrediting body will be reviewed by ELAP. So in essence, there's a separation of you're going to be required to have an OSA, or we're going to depend upon the one that was done by the accrediting body. That's a significant effort. I think any laboratory that has multiple accreditations feels like we need another assessment, like we need another hole in our head, because we're being assessed for the same standard. As a Tni accredited laboratory, and some 100 or so that are currently in the state of California, I'm an advocate that this should be changed to be inclusive of labs inside or outside of California. If we're abiding by the same standard, the real estate portion of where we are should have no bearing, in my opinion, as to whether reciprocity should apply or not. There was something else I was going to add to this. Also, the situation is that the laboratory, so in essence, this treats a lab out of state in a more favorable manner than a lab in state because of the lack of that additional on-site assessment. It does indicate that you may assess if you so choose. That should be included whether you're an in-state or out-of-state laboratory. So for me, I might have a competitor, literally, I do, right over the border-ish in Oregon that is accredited in California, and they're not going to have to potentially have that additional on-site assessment. I would, because I reside in California. That seems very arbitrary, given that we offer the same level of services, same FOAs. Theirs are fewer than ours, but in essence, it's the same technology, and we're going to be held to a standard that requires us to have an additional OSA. It just doesn't seem fair and reasonable to me. Whether it's in the previous regulations or not, I haven't checked, but I will be submitting written comments along these lines at this section. It would be very easy to change that to reflect both labs inside and outside of California. And then it's really up to ELAP to identify whether the assessing authority, I think is what it's called, is reasonable and acceptable or not. In our case, it's approved by TNI. They're vetted by TNI as whether they're doing their job as an assessing authority. So really strongly want you to consider making this adjustment to be inclusive of labs inside or outside of California if they carry a third-party, acceptable third-party accrediting authority. Thank you.
Diane Anderson, Apple Laboratories, along the lines of Steve for 64808.1, the reciprocity. Is there any way we could include somehow in the regs that the on-site assessment for various methods, even though they may not be the exact revision that is accredited by the state of California, if it's the same method number under the EPA or standard methods or whatever, that that accreditation or that on-site assessment would be equivalent to an on-site assessment made by the state of California to the 8260B versus 8260C assessment that we're seeing now?
Thank you, Mindy. Appreciate that.
No worries. Mindy Boley, City of Vacaville again. And again, even though this has no influence on my lab whatsoever, on the reciprocity, I wholeheartedly agree that if we're going to grant reciprocity to labs that have full TNI certification, it should not matter at all if they are already within California or outside California. I mean, if you think about California as a whole, we're trying to do, I mean, the whole thing about sales tax revenue and shop local and all of that, you would want to give a financial benefit at all possible to anybody in California rather than labs outside California. Why make it cheaper for them where we're shipping work out rather than having a lab right here in California that can do the work, that is closer and, you know, that has the full certification? You have much more control. If ELAP decided they wanted to go and do a surprise inspection or assessment of a local, you know, a California TNI lab, it's much easier. The ones outside, if we're taking full, you know, reciprocity that other places have assessed them and all of that, that's great. And if they're fully TNI certified and approved to do work in California, then we would believe them. But we should grant that same permission to any lab in California that is fully TNI certified. So I just wanted to stand up for that one also, even though it does not apply to my lab at all.
And at the expense of maybe creating more questions than answers, I just want to kind of point out that, you know, the idea here is, I mean, if we do move forward with a third-party assessor option, you know, that kind of, I believe, would answer really all of these questions here, because essentially, if you had an assessment done by your TNI accrediting body, that could, again, I'm really going out on a limb here by bringing this up, but just that would account for your third-party assessment. And so the reciprocity wouldn't necessarily apply to you because you've already had it done by a third-party assessor. You want to add?
Well, this is Stephen Clark, Pacific Ecorisk again. If that's the case and the intent is to have a TNI third-party assessor assessment meet that need, then item A should be changed to be labs located inside or outside of California. It still is, this whole section, because it leads with that, suggests it only applies to labs outside of California.
Okay.
And that's actually, I'm going to be submitting a comment with just a little narrative change that qualifies that, because then all the rest makes sense to me. But this basically suggests that 64808.10 is out-of-state labs, this is how you're going to operate. In-state labs, by default, it's not an initial accreditation. We already did that. For us, it would be a renewal accreditation. In there, it says a on-site assessment must be performed. It doesn't say that on-site assessment, if you're TNI accredited from a third-party body, would be acceptable. It leaves it up in the air. So that's all. I mean, I think this is word semantics, but given that we've already had a little bit of dialogue with ELAP about this subject matter, I just think that this leaves more vague interpretation that can lead us down the same path we're going through right now.
And we would have to go back and look at our statutes also.
Can you identify yourself? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
Kim Niemeyer, counsel for ELAP. And we'd have to go back and make sure that it's consistent with the Health and Safety Code, because I'm not sure that it is. I think the Health and Safety Code limits our ability, but we'll go back and look at that.
Yeah, in that situation, I mean, obviously, you have your regulations that you need to write that are consistent with other regs, as other parties have
Well,
requested.
with the statute.
With the
yeah.
statute,
Yeah.
exactly. Reg statute, I'm not an attorney, but like, same thing for me. I think that I'd like, and I don't know whether an agency can lobby for changes along those lines, but for laboratories like mine and Apple, we have reciprocity in lots of other states. They treat us basically as the golden rule, so to speak. You know, they basically defer to our accrediting body. If they have questions from them, they'll solicit for follow-up. This is a unique thing in California if, in fact, the Health and Safety Code has that delineation. And I'd love to talk to you later about what we could or couldn't do to make that change if that's where the change is, if that's where this language is
Yeah,
resonating.
so yeah, the hierarchy is, of course, the Constitution, and then the statutes that are made by the legislators, and we, making our regulations, have to be consistent with that. And so we'll go back and look at it again, see if we can look at it a different way.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, Jacob. This is Josie Tellers. Kim, thank you for checking what you said you're going to check. I appreciate that. But as far as the reciprocity, I would like to request also a clarity in the text to include, again, we are referencing 2016 TNI in the regulations, and therefore, if reciprocity is going to be an available type of accreditation, that it also should refer that either the laboratory outside or inside California is going to have a reciprocity accreditation, that it will be based on 2016 minus the 2 modifications. As it is right now, I know that California is leading the pack towards 2016 TNI. Other states are not yet there. So even though this is available, it's not apples to apples comparison. So that will be most helpful to add in the clarification. And anyhow, thank you.
No, that's a very good comment. Thank you very much, Josie.
Diane Anderson, Apple Laboratories. There's actually 2 issues that we're looking at here. Reciprocity, inside, outside, that Steve was talking about. Mine is actually a little bit different. In the statutes, the methods that the laboratories are accredited to are specific. And those methods are actually very old methods. They're new methods that have come along since then, and the other laboratories accredit to those numbers not to the numbers that the state of California does. And what I'm wondering is if there's some way we can add language that states that the new revised methods are equivalent to the methods that are listed in the statutes.
The methods have been taken out of the statute.
Never mind.
I just will make a comment here, though, that again, the methods that ELAP offers for accreditation are determined by the state agency partners. So for the example of 8260B, that's something that the state agencies have said, we want our laboratories to be providing data using that particular version. They have not instructed or provided direction to ELAP to be using the newer versions. And so that's really you know, where we're having a lot of these difficulties is that, again, ELAP does not determine what methods we're going to offer. It's those that are determined by the state agency partners who are using the data that is generated by our ELAP accredited laboratories. So that's a maybe a long way of saying maybe talk to your clients and see you know, if those newer versions is something that they're going to allow for compliance with their permits and regulations and orders.
Diane Anderson, Apple Laboratories. The issue is not if our client will accept those results, because 100% of my clients will. The issue is, how can I get assessed PT samples and the requirements that I need under the regs as they're written now for the old method, even though I'm running the new method for my customers, which is why I was wondering if we could put some sort of language that says the methods are essentially equal. And that way, if I'm accredited through another state for 8260C, and I submit a PT sample for 8260C or reciprocity for 8260C, then I can get that because they're considered equal.
Yeah, I mean, that's a program kind of thing that we will have to discuss. But again, you know, kind of recentering ourselves and bringing us back, we'll continue moving forward with regulation comments.
Hi, Jacob. That my comment is in response to or related to what Diane just mentioned. And even though it's a program issue, it's extremely important to be addressed because it is in the regulations, you know, that for PT samples to pass, the PT naming convention has to match exactly what ELAP has. It's in the regulation. And therefore, even though you're saying it's program-wise, it's essential that we have some clarity because after all, the methods are the same. ELAP naming convention is just behind. And therefore, we have laboratories that are currently failing because the method numbers are not the same or the versions are different. So I'm urging you to consider that we had to have at least a crosswalk or a clarity so that it's not missing a last letter on a method constitute a failure even though the results is correct.
And again, I don't mean want to belabor this, but the methods that ELAP offers are determined by the state agencies. We're not the ones who are saying use B or C. The state agency who's accepting their data for regulatory compliance is the one who has determined that it should be 8260B, not C. And it's not ELAP who makes that determination.
Correct me if I'm wrong, are the FOT list that we have for the past 3-4 years, has that changed? or is it still the same FOT listing that we have when we're selecting what field of testing we're supposed to be accredited for, including the subgroup? Has that changed?
Yeah, those FOTs are determined by the state agencies. So that's why if there's any change, that would be at the direction of a state agency who says add a method or revise a method, anything of that nature. So again, I mean, I think this is a very good conversation for the sake of what we're, the purpose here. If we can just focus back on comments related to the regulations, I would just kindly ask that. Thank you.
All right. Well, hopefully the FOT group actually through LTAC meet. Isn't there a work group for FOT? All right, thank you.
Okay, we're about halfway through the articles, so we'll kind of continue moving forward onto Article 4.
Okay, so Article 4 goes over the types of laboratories that ELAP will accredit. This is an area that doesn't have great description in current regulations. So the objective of this article was to really describe the different types of laboratories that ELAP accredits and the criteria that they have to meet to be considered one of those laboratory types. So main laboratory is basically just a description of what a main laboratory would be. That's the brick and mortar laboratory that everybody's familiar with. The two main types of laboratories that went into greater discussion are the satellite laboratory and the mobile laboratory. So there was more detail on the criteria that has to be met to be able to be considered a satellite or a mobile laboratory in these two various sections. The one section that we want to highlight here, 64810.05, the satellite laboratory, there was consideration to have a distance criteria included with the satellite laboratory as far as the criteria. Basically, we were considering, ELAP was considering that the satellite laboratory had to be within the same county. That has been removed, that criteria or requirement, and that was from feedback from the laboratory community and LTAC. And ELAP feels that the technical manager oversight will basically be able to, we can eliminate that requirement because of the technical manager oversight requirement. And with that, if there's any comments on Article 4, we'll take that now.
Raji Subramanian, City of Roseville. Could you please clarify or the section 64810.05A1 says the main laboratory and satellite laboratory operate under a single scope of accreditation that is divided among each location. When you say it's divided, does it mean that some of the methods have to be done in one place and the others are the other place? Or could it be that all of them are done at both places and they can still be satellite labs as long as one of the labs is the one that is reporting the data and rest of it is all there? What does divided among each location actually say or mean?
Okay, sorry for the delay there in response. So this was a part of this section that was revised per LTAC recommendations, and that we wanted to not limit the satellite laboratory to be only accredited for fields of accreditation that were also accredited with the main laboratory. So they could operate or do some field of accreditation on their own, but it's under one scope of accreditation. So the idea is that you could have a satellite lab that says does just bacteria, but the other laboratory doesn't have to do that, or microbiology rather. They don't have to be accredited in that microbiology, but the oversight is done by that technical manager. So it's under one umbrella of the scope of accreditation.
So if that's the case, so my question about if both labs did exactly the same thing, but all the data is under the same SOPs, under the same QA manual, and it's under one technical manager, all that other stuff, then can one lab be a satellite of the other lab as long as all the data is being reported from one main lab? Yes?
That's the intent.
That's the intent.
So maybe we could change the language to be shared or divided.
Yep.
Okay,
That'd be
sure,
great.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we really appreciate all the comments and questions and whatnot. For especially those that are necessary for clarity. I think those are really going to be the most beneficial to all parties involved.
Stephen Clark, Pacific Eco-Risk and LTAC member. I'd just like to clarify maybe a little bit of history in regards to the 64810.05 satellite laboratory. There were no votes at LTAC in regards to, as I recall, structured language for this. What you received was a variety of comments from various LTAC members. So when you indicated, Andrew, that LTAC had suggested, it was some LTAC members.
Yes.
It wasn't a group of LTAC that voted percentage-wise. And honestly, I was an advocate for within the same county. I worry that the capacity for a laboratory, say in southern part of the state, to effectively manage a laboratory, say in Reading, or multiple laboratories throughout and calling them all satellite labs. One of the key issues that we've heard about, I don't think that's reasonable or feasible. There's no quantity of satellite laboratories limited here. I think that, as I have understood from day one of the key concerns with having ELAP under State Water Board was to correct problems from the past, both within the oversight of the laboratories and the perspective of the potential of quality of work from the labs. I think that you're probably going to, with this implemented as such, just abroad anywhere in the state of California. For example, if I had 5 toxicity laboratories throughout the state, I'd be able to say, hypothetically under this, they're all satellites of me. I'm the technical director. And I don't know how that could effectively be managed. I don't know how you'd have quality managers, obligations or not. I can understand if you're right down the road from each other, as Roseville might be, that makes sense. But I also think that you might find a pretty dramatic decrease in fees because our satellite laboratories charge the fees separate from the main lab. Are they accredited? Or do they fall under the main laboratory's accreditation?
That will all be addressed through the fee work group.
Okay, because there's a lot of large,
and it will be considered.
There's a lot of large corporate laboratories that would like to see reduced fees, and one of the ways you reduce those fees is to put all labs under one umbrella, under this satellite narrative. So the lack of a cap on satellites is of concern to me, and as I said, I definitely had a dissenting opinion from some other LTAC members on the prospect of casting this out as statewide versus some proximity to the main laboratory that's where the technical director is residing.
Raji Subramanian again. As far as satellite labs, is there any, I don't notice anything in the regulation talking about assessment. How would a satellite lab be assessed? Similarly, differently, how does the renewal work? Is it just for the main lab sense in the renewal, and it includes both labs or more than one lab? And would each lab need to be subjected to an assessment every 2 years? How is that going to work?
We're just reviewing our notes over here to see if we can provide some clarity for you. 1 second. Well, as we're looking through it here to make sure. I mean, essentially, I hear what your comment is, and so we're either just verifying that we have that kind of clarification in the text, or if not, we will consider that as your comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mindy Boley, City of Vacaville. On that also, I agree that I know that there were some discrepancies of using the word same county, just because you could have, West Sac, you could have it something right there that's Sacramento County and Yolo County or whatever. So I do think including some type of a description of proximity, whether it's a 30-mile radius or, some type of physical, because again, if you are going to do assessments and you have an assessment team coming, you want to be able to say that you can assess the lab, the satellite lab, whatever, within a reasonable time frame. And driving 30 miles or whatever to a new site is doable. Driving from Redding down to Southern California to be able to continue an assessment is not doable. So I think adding some type of limitation on that. And then the other question came up with how many satellite labs, and the language on here states, it's a laboratory and a satellite laboratory. It does not say laboratories. So I think if somebody is going to be allowed to have more than one satellite lab associated with their initial, accreditation, then the language there needs to be changed to plural if that is a possibility. If not, if we're saying you're only allowed to have one additional one, then leaving it how it is perfect. But that would kind of answer that question of how many you can have also. So, thank you.
Stephen Clark again with Pacific Ecorisk. I think you don't really need to pay that close of attention because it's already been covered on the satellite lab. But the main point applies. This point applies to the mobile laboratories too. There needs to be clarity in the regs in regards to how OSAs are handled for laboratories that have mobile, as well as, at least I don't recall there being language in there, mobile as well as satellite labs. What you don't want to be doing is just simply assessing the main laboratory and not evaluating the mobile labs. I mean, ultimately, if you don't have a technical director and a quality manager at a mobile laboratory, which may be reasonable due to the size of it and the limitation of its FOTs, that main laboratory has an obligation to do assessments of that lab under this standard as well as under TNI. So it depends upon where we go in the state of California in the future. And that has to be thorough. And one of the reasons we have external assessments is to ensure the thoroughness of internal laboratory audits. And I worry that without clarity, that part of the assessment obligations would be part of the obligations for having satellite mobile laboratories, that they are part of the OSA that's done either by ELAP or third parties. It's going to be pretty critical to have that in there.
Okay, just want to just quickly point this out and for you guys to consider. Under 64810.05 satellite laboratory, it does say in accordance with section 64808.15, which I believe points you back to amendment accreditation. And so the idea is that the main laboratory would need to be accredited first. And then if you want to amend your accreditation by adding a satellite laboratory, that section 64808.15 would provide you with the details and the information that you would need to bring your satellite laboratory under your single scope of accreditation. And again, there's also regarding mobile laboratories, 64810.10 directs the laboratory to section 64808.00.
Stephen Clark again. Thank you for that reference. But again, I'm skimming that. I'm still not seeing on-site assessment obligations. It's an application requirement.
Okay.
Existing lab name, certification, name of laboratory, details of size and scope, name of quals of the technical manager, name of the quality manager, agreement to comply with ELAP, signatures, signed FOTs, proficiency testing.
Keep going.
Complete an on-site assessment. There it is, right there. It's in compliance with that section. So they would need to complete an on-site assessment to get accredited, but what about maintaining accreditation?
Okay,
that's what I'm talking about.
Okay,
Yeah, I understand the
yep.
upfront, but that from that point forward, it doesn't say ongoing on-site assessments must be part of maintaining. Well, that's no longer an amendment accreditation. At that point forward, it would be presumably falling under either renewal or reciprocity, that they need to have an assessment of their main laboratory, whatever we want to call that, as well as satellite lab or mobile lab.
Excellent comment. Thank you.
Hello again, Josie Tellers. For 64810.00, since we're going for clarification, that should also refer back on how the main laboratory, what section in the regulation that the main laboratory need to comply with as far as their application. Again, it's in support of the mobile laboratory, as you referred earlier, 64810.10A. The intent for that section is if the mobile laboratory will be a standalone main laboratory. So going back to 64810.00 for main laboratory, it has to direct the applicant to what accreditation criteria within the regulation they have to follow.
Okay, thank you. And please include that with your formal comments,
Right.
or with your comments during this comment period.
Okay.
Right.
And again, on a side note, the fees for all this type of laboratories hopefully will be discussed in the fee work group, because it's going to be impacted as well. There will be a great impact. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming up on 12 o'clock. I'd like to suggest that we take a break, a lunch break, and we can either meet back at 12:30, or if there's a preference to extend it a little bit longer, I would entertain that. How about 1 o'clock? We get a motion over here for 1 o'clock. I think that's acceptable, and so we'll go ahead and take a break now. And reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you again to all those who are joining in online. And just to reiterate, we are now going to be taking a lunch break, and so we will reconvene at 1 p.m. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for coming back after lunch. Hopefully everybody had a good lunch and we're ready to continue moving forward. We left off, we finished taking comments on Article 4, so we'll just keep moving, going into Article 5. Article 5 is laboratory personnel, facilities, and equipment. And with two subsections, 64A12, focusing on laboratory personnel. These are the credential requirements for the management and analysts in a laboratory. And of particular to note here is that ELAP in this third preliminary draft removed the minimum certificate grade table. And what we replaced it with was a narrative on with the intent to align the minimum certificate grade requirements with those, align it with the requirements for the facilities permit. And so this is a pretty probably substantial change for I think many people, and so we anticipate that there'll be several comments, and we welcome those. And if this particular change didn't, if there's issues with it that you're seeing, we definitely welcome those, and we're just trying to make trying to find a solution for what to do. The previous table included references to the FOTs, and that is what we were trying to kind of avoid as much as possible without locking us into the regulations. So if I'm just imagining that there will be several comments on that, and we welcome that. Under 64812.05, laboratory facilities and equipment, this here just details the requirements for how the laboratory shall be arranged and operated. And so that's the pretty high level overview, and we'll now open it up to the comments.
Jacob, this is Stephen Clark with Pacific Eco-Risk and LTAC member. My comment is in regards to just a little bit of potential need for clarifying language on 64812.00 laboratory personnel, sub-item H. It identifies in the narrative a laboratory shall designate a principal analyst or analyst to be a user of sophisticated laboratory instruments defined in section 64801.00Q. Sophisticated laboratory instruments are not identified in that section. It's sophisticated technologies. And I understand the concept here because some instruments can be very complicated and require a level of maybe clearance for something along the lines of principal analysts. However, as you go to that definition for sophisticated technologies, aquatic toxicology or bioassays are listed there. We don't use sophisticated equipment. pH meters, DO meters, it's not sophisticated. And so my recommendation is that after sophisticated laboratory instruments, to add 4 sophisticated technologies as defined in that section. That way it's basically for when you're using very unique instruments for sophisticated technologies, sophisticated instruments for sophisticated technologies. Because right now it's citing sophisticated laboratory instruments as defined, and that's not in the definition section.
Okay.
And I think it also, and maybe even, and I'll submit written comments, identify that this is not applicable to bioassay labs. We're dealing with organisms, and there are no sophisticated instruments, there are no courses taught by manufacturers, et cetera. So this seems to be very specifically intended to be dealing with sophisticated instruments, and I get it, but I think there needs to be a little bit of narrative changes there, and I'll submit some written comments along those lines.
Excellent, thank you.
Mandy Boley, City of Vacaville, LTAC member. Along those lines, as far as in H, where we reference the principal analyst. Now, principal analyst is a term that has been used in traditional ELAP regulations, but it is not found anywhere. There's no requirement on that on TNI. if I believe correctly. So is this something that we're adding back in as additional language or terminology that we have to identify staff? Because I thought principal analyst was not something in TNI that needs to be designated. You have your technical managers and then you have staff. So I just want us to double check that.
How are you reading subpart I?
Well, no, I'm saying on H where it says the laboratory shall designate a principal analyst.
Right. For this is one of those sunset clauses where in the meantime there will be a designated principal analyst, but once the sunset clause and we move towards the TNI framework, then we kind of shift into the requirements under the TNI standard.
Okay, I see. I missed that part where it does go away. Okay, that's fine on that. So then the other question I had is on B, and you talked about the chart being gone with the certification, and that's all fine because I know that still had a lot of issues with it on the chart itself. The thing that I think we need to kind of clarify or figure out for sure is where you have in that line item that, you know, whoever holds a valid CWEA or AWWA lab analyst certification shall be deemed to meet the qualifications of the technical manager. Who makes that judgment? Is it going to be something in a chart that's definite? Is it going to be a day-to-day judgment call on an ELAP staff where one person that holds a certificate can do it and then others get denied being able to do it? You know, I think you just need to have something, we need to come up with something that will make that more firm, that it's not just going to be, and again, I know we're going back to old ELAP where different people make different decisions or whatever, but that we just need to have something set in stone so that it's not a judgment call. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good day. Stephen Garner with California, Nevada, AWWA. And further discussion on that.
Stephen, I might interrupt you. I don't know if it's me or it did. It sounded like it, right? It might have run out of battery. Maybe we can. Let's see. You want to check? We might want to check with that other one. Might.
Take a stand and all. So I'll start fresh. Stephen
There we
Garner
go.
with California, Nevada, AWWA certification manager. And relative to if the level of certification in that same B has educational experience requirements appropriate, recognizing that our certification exams are addressed based on a practice analysis of the position and not necessarily in compliance with regulatory expectations. Therefore, the practice analysis that we next run, which I expect to run in about 2020, may come up with a set of education and experience requirements for each of the grade levels that may or may not be in alignment with what you would expect for the water plants or for the laboratory activities. So how we coordinate between our practice analysis and your expectations of what is needed might be a factor to address, not necessarily in the regulation document, but as two organizations.
Thank you.
Hi, Jacob. This is Josie again. Along the same line, is it possible for us to include a narrative where there's a conflict between public or city agencies' policy and procedure as far as personal qualification is concerned, that actually those policy and procedure from those agencies actually supersedes? Because if we follow currently what your requirements are, there's going to be a lot of job descriptions that's going to be affected, and that have to go to different bargaining units and city council and all that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Josie, when you submit your comments, especially that one, if you can just be specific to as to which sections where you think that language
exactly.
would be most applicable.
Yes, and I can, we can add it, but just to name a few is when it conflicts with TNI's hiring and firing, awarding of contracts, those are what I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Please include those. Thank you.
Jacob, Stephen Clark with Pacific Risk. A quick question. Well, you said you wouldn't necessarily handle questions, but I don't recall, let me get to the section here, 64812.05, lab facilities and equipment. Is that right? Lab facility and equipment, sub-item C and D, basically putting the oversight of hazardous materials and chemical waste handling under an ELAP authority. All laboratories are required to comply with current regulations. Some may or may not have them bundled with their quality assurance program. And so this I don't recall being in past drafts. And I'm just curious if I missed it or if you have an opportunity to kind of engage in terms of why that's in here under a quality program. I think the only standard element within, say, TNI is that we have to have a chemical inventory process that establishes expiration dates for chemicals. TNI doesn't present information on storage and handling of hazardous wastes, et cetera. Those are compliant with OSHA, federal, Cal OSHA, and for us in Solano County, we have Solano County obligations. So I'm just a little puzzled in terms of why that's being put in a laboratory accreditation standard.
And they're actually in our current regulations as they exist now. So that's something that we've carried over from the existing to these new proposed regulations. And it's my understanding that they were in prelim 1 and 2.
Okay. And like I said, I don't recall. Given that they're redundant with existing code, it just seems to me one more thing for your personnel to be dealing with, one more thing for QA teams when they're dealing with assessors and ELAP to be engaging with, when parties might actually have a health and safety team that's dealing with that. I know it's maybe an existing code, but this is the time to change that. Existing regs, or I'm not sure if codes and regs are being interchanged here.
Regs is, this is Kim Niemeyer. And the reason why we would put it in is because it gives us the ability to enforce it, to require it. Otherwise, we don't have the ability to ensure that that's happening.
And enforcement is being handled by other parties. So anyway, it just seems redundant to have multiple agencies overseeing the same thing. Just, comment for the record, I suppose.
Hi, Jacob. It's a
Hi.
follow-up on what Steve brought up. Chemical hygiene plan is typically what we term it in the laboratory, regulated by OSHA. It's also for public agencies like City of Davis. We have part of our safety plan that if we have a laboratory, that we have that chemical hygiene plan, and various training as far as safety for operators, laboratory, and all city personnel. So I'm not, again, when I had our laboratory to be first certified by ELAP, in one of the checklists they did say that they want to see a chemical hygiene plan during the on-site assessment. Is that pretty much what you intend to do, is to check if we have a chemical hygiene plan for the lab?
It's a good question. I'm not gonna answer that right now. I think, um, as our council said, I mean, this is something that we intend to include so that we are able to enforce it when there's issues that are clearly in violation of these other regulations.
Okay, because the safety being disposed of laboratories are also under the purview of city and county agencies for the wastewater treatment process and pre-treatment program. So
Correct.
there's, yeah.
And I mean, there's all kinds of laboratories within the laboratory accreditation program. So maybe not, this may not necessarily be applicable to the city laboratories or municipal laboratories. Maybe it's more applicable to a commercial laboratory, who may not be under the same purview or same level of review by these other agencies.
Okay,
And
well,
so when there's something like this, I mean, typically, it's something that it's related to laboratories, and it's something that we want to be able to ensure is the proper waste and disposal is happening. So
right, and
Yeah.
OSHA also, under the OSHA requires laboratories coming from a commercial laboratories. Our laboratories were under OSHA's purview, and we get audited. Our chemical our chemical storage were also audited. More details, in detail. Now, is ELAP willing to do the same audit during the on-site assessment purview? Not just the laboratory, but the chemical around the laboratory, how it's disposed and whatnot, because OSHA is already doing that, as well as enforcement. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And we hear the comment, and obviously council's here to continue to provide ELAP with further input on this matter. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Debbie Webster, Civiqua. In section 4, excuse me, try this again, 64812A, I just question if you might have a circular type of reference, because you talk about the technical manager, and then it goes on to reference that they have to comply. There's parts about TNI, but in your definitions there's another technical manager that is actually defined by the TNI standards. And so the question is do those sections align completely, or potentially does the technical manager, or are we being circular? Are we cutting out areas? Is it complete? And it just was hard to be able to tell that. So.
And I hear the comment, and if either now or possibly through your written comment, if you can dial down and be specific as to which sections you're referring to, that would be very helpful. Manager's also pointing out to me just something for the community to consider, as also is that the requirements for the technical manager are an exception to the TNI standard. So as you guys are thinking about this and understanding the regulations, please consider that.
Jacob Stephen Clark with Pacific Eco-Risk again. On item 6481200A, and the sub items there that identify the technical director qualifications. I'm not talking about the items that follow after that for CWEA type organizations or certifications. I'm not sure if this is entirely consistent with TNI either. I know that I'm on a subcommittee right now that's talking about how to set qualifications for the technical directors at TNI accredited laboratories. And I know that part of for the WET committee, the TNI, Steve Boggs has been participating in that as well, your staff. And I know that other groups within TNI are discussing the technical director qualifications too. it seems to me that probably the easiest thing to do would be just to cite the T&I qualifications requirements and then the provision B down below to provide alternative latitude. Because if in fact they tweak that, and I'm not sure if it's going to relate to the 2016 or not, then these regs will have another thing that is not consistent beyond the CWEA allowance. So if I understood what the goals were a technical director qualification to allow for CWEA certifications, and the secondary thing was 1 PT. If in fact the main technical director qualifications ends up changing, then we have a third thing that's inconsistent. So just might recommend just citing T&I with the exception for CWEA. And then you'll be entirely consistent on the other technical director qualifications.
Okay, something to
Mindy Boley again. So in B1 of that section on the technical manager, where we're talking about exempt from meeting the requirements, where it has that a technical manager who was, already employed and can be grandfathered basically, but it has the employment date as of December 31st, 1994. How many, directors of record on 94? I mean, I thought the whole thing was going to be that when this takes effect, anybody who currently holds that position was going to be grandfathered in. Am I reading this wrong?
Okay, so, excuse me, the requirements here for technical manager come directly from our current regulations, almost verbatim. So the exceptions that are granted are what are in our current regulations. Everything past that, you have to comply with what is written. So we're not changing anything at all. It's really, we're using current regulations guidance for.
So that's an exception to B. So you have the T&I requirements in A. B is the exception for the CWEA, and then C is an exception from B.
Okay, so so some of these very small labs that have an operator as their lab director right now, and they've been granted that through ELAP, they're going to continue to be fine, I guess is my, but if they are if they are currently on record an approved ELAP lab director, will they be fine when it switches to this, or are you saying they are no longer going to be valid?
They would need to meet the requirements of B.
Okay. These are the exact same requirements that are currently in regulations. So
I understand that, but that's what I'm saying. I don't know. So are we currently following this right now 100% with who's approved to be lab directors of record?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
And I just, this is Debbie Webster. I'm a little bit confused by your language, and I think that there's some that was said to this, but I just want to make sure that it's said in section H of the section that we're talking about. When it talks about in H3, it says for the principal analyst, you have a statement, it says, have at least 6 months experience in the operation of sophisticated instrument in the analysis of environmental samples. And I think, Stephen, you said that there was some inconsistency about just even the nomenclature. But I think the other concern that I think the other concern that I want to make sure that is not, is that should laboratory equipment change, that should never invalidate somebody that is a principal analyst. Things are going to change. The instrumentation's going to change. If they have to have 6 months prior experience in its new instrumentation, that seems very catch-22 to me. So.
Stephen Clark with Pacific Icarus. I'm going to be a little bit more direct there. Not my technology, not my lab, but how can a laboratory have 6 months of experience with a piece of instrumentation that's new to the lab? Right? So the challenge is you get, well, you need a principal analyst with 6 months of experience to use that equipment. Well, how do you establish that experience? I mean, does the laboratory have to spend 6 months running quality samples to be able to give the stamp of approval that they can use a GC ECD or something along those lines? So I'm not quite sure how this, that's a considerable investment of time to be able to do that. I think, Andrew, you might have said this is in the existing regs, but so you can see the implementation challenge that would create. Under TNI, the way TNI works, granted, we're not talking about everything TNI here, this is an opportunity to make changes to the existing regs. Under TNI, you establish a training program. 2016 has put the training requirements back in that were in the 2003 standard that came out in 2009. So you have to have an established training program, established training records, and established clearances for parties to participate in work units or work cells or work, whatever they call them. And so once the person's gone through that training, even on a sophisticated piece of equipment, they would under TNI be cleared to work on that. Now, it does say subdivision H is invalidated. I understand HGI says that's invalidated within 3 years, but still, how does a laboratory get a new piece of equipment and they want to expand into a market and establish 6 months of experience for an analyst? That's difficult. And it would seem to me that if they've got a demonstrated training program that they're following, their quality assurance and their quality control records are showing that their records are still good, the performance of the analyses are good, they're not getting outside of specs, that should be sufficient for demonstrating that they can use the instrument. And maybe an analytical chemistry laboratory in here might have a different opinion, but sub-item 3 under H seems difficult to implement.
Hi, Jacob. This is Josie again. I'm going to go one step further with what Stephen said. My concern is, why is ELAP regulation dictating who's going to run sophisticated technology instruments? Like what it says in J. Why?
Thank you for the question, Josie. And I mean, it's a matter of.
It's almost. I'm sorry. It's almost out of bounds.
Well, and really, that's the principal. The idea of the principal analyst is something that is in our existing regulations, and we recognize that we hear your comments, and the path forward or where we're moving towards is what we're proposing here is this Tni framework of allowing the laboratories to really determine who's capable and able to run the instruments and technology and anything in your own laboratory. But as in this 3-year window, we have to have something. And so what we've chosen is to continue to use our existing regulations for what is required now for principal analysts. And so we hear what you're saying, and we recognize that, and we know where we want to go. This is just, what do we do in the meantime? Because what we're hearing from, what we would like to do is have this 3-year implementation window, allow laboratories to the time to move forward. But what do we do in the meantime? And this here is using our existing regulations.
Understood, but the J is what I'm trying to say, is that, even though H expires in 3 years, J still dictates.
Pardon me, I thought you were talking about H.
No, J still dictates who's going to run what. So Yeah, well, principal analysts need to be moved out of that, but then at the same time, if you have a good training record and if you're following the TNI requirements for training plan, the laboratory should have the ability to assign who is qualified to run an instrument based on training, not necessarily based on title or educational experience.
It does say or other personnel designated by the technical manager. So it does, I think, offer that.
Mindy again. Yeah, no, I agree with having that or other designated. I think basically just to fix J, what we would need to do, and I'll put it in as a recommendation, is take out the principal analyst and just have shall be operated by either the technical manager or other personnel designated by technical manager, you know, and that would be once you have a true technical manager. Before the 3 years are expired, then you would follow the stuff above. Yeah. But just take out the principal analyst because that term will no longer exist in 3 years.
Thank you for clarifying that, Mindy. Appreciate it.
Stephen Clark again, Jacob. So instead of questioning, I'm going to give a recommendation for sub-item 3, because yes, the staging in the 3-year window, that's all covered. Changing I to maybe remove principal analyst. Principal analyst is in your code, so if you, regs code, I'm sorry, Kim, I get those mixed up as a scientist. Anyway, under sub-H, item 3, I think I would recommend just striking the 6 months and identify have demonstrated experience and associated records in the operation of sophisticated equipment. So if you really are compelled to keep the principal analyst window for a 3-year window of time, or narrative for a 3-year window of time, that basically have a demonstrated experience and supporting records. And the laboratory defines what that demonstrated experience and supporting records are. So they'd have to define somewhere in their quality manual what those elements were so it's auditable, or it can be done by an assessor.
Thank you, and please include those in your comments.
Stephen Clark again, Pacific Eucharist. Again, not an analytical chemistry laboratory, but I work with a bunch of them. So under 64812.05, sub item E3, when a change in sophisticated technology occurs, the laboratory shall submit an amendment application package following et cetera. Is a change in sophisticated technology intended to mean when you add a new FOT or you update the manufacturer of your GCMS?
So the intent of this was if it's a brand new technology to the laboratory, then by default, you're going to have to apply for a new FOA.
Right, and so I'd have to go back to that section.
To
to assume that that means when you're adding a new field of accreditation.
Exactly.
Not a new instrument for the same field.
No,
Okay.
so if it's a similar technology, then that's not new to the lab, it's the same technology.
Okay, I think that had come up in some LTAC meetings in the past. I don't recall the resolution. Thank you very much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
So on that one, for E, instead of saying when there is a change in sophisticated technology, would it just be when you are adding a new sophisticated technology? Because it's not change if you're just changing a machine. I mean, that is a true change in a sophisticated technology. But if you are adding a new, would that be the wording you'd want on there? Just for avoid confusion.
Again, just for this sake, this section was to aim to incorporate both of those. So if you were to upgrade your instrument, it's the same technology, but you're changing it, you'd have to update your quality manual and the various documents that apply to it, and that's the intent. But if it's a brand new technology, then it would actually be an amendment because you'd have to add an FOA and go through the accreditation process.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Diane Anderson with Apple Laboratories. I agree that if you're changing your sophisticated technology, then you're going to have to update your quality manual, you're going to have to update your SOPs, but I don't see that you should have to submit an amended application package.
Under E3, I think what Andrew was trying to communicate was that if you're now bringing on a new type of sophisticated technology online into your laboratory.
I need to read further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking out here into the crowd, and everybody looks really deeply involved in the text, and so we can continue to keep moving forward, and then like I mentioned earlier, towards the end, if there's any comments that you didn't get a chance to provide, we will open it up again for all of the sections. So with that, we'll move on to Article 6.
Okay, Article 6, notification, reporting, control of records, change of technical manager or ownership, and trade secrets. So Section 64814.00 is notification, reporting, and records retention. There's various themes within the section, but it's focused on notification requirements of the laboratory, specifically drinking water notifications, subcontracting work requirements, reporting of results, who's responsible, specifically with subcontracting, subcontractors rather, and control of records. What's pretty new to this section, it was in other versions, but not in current regulations, is a detailed description of subcontracting work, what the requirements are of the subcontracting laboratory, as well as the subcontractor. So that's a pretty big addition to these proposed regulations. 64814.05, these are notifications of change of technical manager or change of ownership. These are in our current regulations as well. These are notifications that laboratories currently have to do, but what we did was we included more of a step-by-step way to notify ELAP of when these changes do occur. And specifically timelines of when these notifications have to come into ELAP. And then 64814.10 is trade secrets, and this is straight from our current regulations. There's no change to this. And with that, we can move on to comments on Article 6.
In F, where it talks about subcontracting, if a laboratory is subcontracting work, you have number 1 saying that the subcontracting labs shall comply with 2016 Tni standard. Currently, as far as I know it, there is no lab out there that is certified to 2016 Tni standard, because all the other states and anybody who is a Tni certifying body is currently only up to 2009. So I don't know how we should put that in there when I think the regulation for California, if we are subcontracting work, they need to be ELAP certified. They don't care if they're TNI certified. So you have that as B or 2C, that the subcontractor shall be accredited by ELAP, and that's as an or, but then you have that goes away 3 years, if you go down to subsection F2, that those options go away 3 years afterwards. So you're saying after this sunset clause occurs, any lab that we're going to subcontract through has to be full TNI certified, even though California itself is only going to be ELAP certified. I think that's a double standard that needs to be corrected, that we say that everybody has to be California ELAP certified. And that would count for the labs that are TNI certified, that get reciprocity through ELAP, and would cover everything. And I think that's what the standard should be right now. If you just have that as line 1, that anything you subcontract through has to be ELAP certified, the rest of it can go away. I mean, other than the requirements about what paperwork you have to contain, but certification requirements all go away because that covers everything. They're certified through you, which is what's in our permits, that we have to send work to, you know, a certified lab. So.
Minor clarification. Under F1, it's just complying with the standards, not certified to the TNI standard. And it's compliant to section 4.5. So just a clarification on that comment. But it was a really valuable comment, and certainly something that you've thought about and you've noticed and looked and thought up and down about. So it was a great comment, and if you could put that into a written comment and help us to really understand that logic where you got from here to there, that would be most helpful.
Jacob, Stephen Clark with Pacific EcoRisk. So under that same item F subsection 2C, the subcontractor shall be accredited by ELAP in the fields of testing. For many regulatory programs, that similar narrative, such as NPDES, is in the orders. For other regulatory programs, that is not listed. And some of the reason that's not listed is that the capabilities of laboratories in California may not be able to achieve the outcome and the need for the regulatory program. So we may need to contract up in Washington for certain services. I've got a project on ballast water that is, we're using a Southern California laboratory for almost all the analyses, but they spike in a standard into there for recoveries that was one of the analysis we need. So we had to find a lab somewhere back east to be able to fulfill that goal. And we did a rigorous search. So as a TNI accredited laboratory, wherever we have a regulatory program that sites must be ELAP accredited, we need to comply with that. And then we have to seek out TNI accredited labs. Otherwise, we have the flexibility to seek out TNI accredited labs anywhere to fulfill the services. We obviously prefer California businesses because we are one, but this is tying our hands to only work with laboratories certified by ELAP, even for regulatory programs that do not have that requirement.
So if we just changed F, when a laboratory subcontracts work, that needs to be done by an ELAP accredited lab?
There you go. There you go. Exactly. Thank you. I couldn't think of creative language. I was going to say comply with TNI but yeah, that would work. Yeah.
What we don't want is when a lab gets suspended,
Yep.
for them to subcontract work to a non-ELAP lab.
Agree 100%. And then for TNI labs, when assuming if we move forward with TNI into the future, sub-item G is you're going to comply with the TNI standard, which is you must select a TNI accredited laboratory, which is interesting because California's labs will not be TNI accredited. So you've got a bridging of a 3-year window that's going to put laboratories that have opted to go with full TNI for their businesses, purposes, or whatnot, for which we're going to potentially have a future conflict when the 3-year window sunsets. Because here it says to meet the TNI standards, I'd have to look at subdivision F1. It cites the TNI standard, which I believe says you have to subcontract to TNI accredited labs. California would not be TNI accredited labs.
Right, so we could We can address that too by
thank you.
saying something like subcontracting laboratory shall be ELAP certified and comply with blah, blah, blah.
And/or compliant with TNI standard or something like that. Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Well, and we'll definitely, like Kim mentioned, we'll definitely look into it, and I would just invite others to just review section 4.5.5 under the TNI standard.
Stephen Garner with California, Nevada, AWWA. And this may have been clarified in some session I didn't attend, but in F1, when it says some contracting laboratory shall comply with 2016 TNI standards in the various sections, what measure, what method will be used to determine? Is it that they are TNI accredited or that they're in compliance through some other method? And how will the State Water Board know?
Section 4.5 of the TNI standard describes what to do when subcontracting, and so that's what we're intending to say is that if you're going to subcontract, you must comply with these sections, section 4.5,
Sure.
or in the 3-year window do these things.
Right. But my question is, how will you know they comply? What measure, what assessment, what approach will you use to determine they comply short of TNI accreditation?
Oh, so you're saying during the 3-year implementation window, how will we know that they're complying with the TNI
Right.
standard?
Right. If I raise my hand and said, I comply, how will you know? Unless I'm TNI accredited, of course. But outside of that, what process will you use to make that determination is my
Okay,
question.
I see what you're saying. Thank you.
Hi, Jacob. I have a question, general question on providing you with comments. The current document, the clean version, is available in Word document. Would you allow us to suggest narrative or put our comments under track changes and submit that as attachment to you?
It's up to you, however you think is best to accept comments.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we went through this targeted round with LTAC, we had provided them with a format for how to respond to the comments. And that was really helpful for us in being able to organize them and evaluate them after the end of the comment period. And so this time around with this third draft, I mean, we didn't really designate or specify how, so I would say it's really up to the
Whichever is easier for
commenter,
us, how's
whatever's
that?
easier for you, yeah.
Okay, thank
I
you.
mean, we do have to consolidate, organize, evaluate them, and so you know, keeping that in mind too would be appreciated by our team.
Josie, just to follow up on that, I think as someone that will probably be reviewing this myself, track changes might be a little difficult, but the comments, that's easily seen and know exactly what you're asking, whereas track changes might not be necessarily seen, and we don't want to miss comments. Because we have the old regulations that are in there too, there's a lot of strike through, and comments might be easier as for us. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to Article 7. Reasons for denial, citation, suspension, or revocation. And this is a section that was not, or that is not currently addressed in our existing regulations. And it's our belief that any good regulations would include this type of information, especially for the laboratory community to really understand, you know, what may result in an adverse action. And so 64816.00, denial of accreditation, lists a list of laboratory actions that can lead to denial of accreditation. 6481605, issuance of a citation, laboratory actions that can lead to a monetary fine. 64816.10, suspension or revocation of accreditation. These are the, again, actions that the laboratories need to be aware of that could lead to suspension, revocation, or revocation of accreditation. We'll take comments.
Jacob, Stephen Clark, Pacific Equus. So for clarification, these are new additions to the regs, right? So they're not citing old narrative. Okay, good. So on 64816.05, the issue of citation, and the following section, 0.10, the suspension or revocation, I agree with the vast majority of those as potentially egregious violations or significant lapses that, you know, should or could result in a citation or on a revocation of the laboratory accreditation. The two that I have some concerns with, because it brings in opinion and scale and magnitude, are the same on both of them, although different numbers. Under 0.05, item A2, a laboratory fails to comply with the analytical method listed on the lab's certification and accreditation. And then item 10, a laboratory makes consistent errors in analysis or erroneous reporting. That's the same narrative as item 12 under 0.10. My concern there, for both of those, is degree and magnitude. These are typically handled as findings in an on-site assessment or findings in an internal audit for which correction is required. And then a corrective action report is done internally or based on an external audit to show that you're moving toward correcting the errors. And so I worry that those two items leave a tremendous amount of personal interpretation. And even if adding the word I'm thinking may still do that, persistently fails to comply, persistent errors of something along those lines. Because I would hate to see laboratories getting fines and threats of accreditation loss because they had a lapse in recording temperature for logging in a sample. Those things happen in a laboratory. That's supposed to be caught in your internal quality evaluations and or in audits, and then you make corrections. So the assessor comes in, you somehow missed it. Well, you have failed to comply with the analytical method. You did not store your samples at 0 to 6 degrees. Therefore, citation. That seems pretty heavy-handed, so I'd like to see you guys strongly consider putting a persistent problem in there as something that justifies that it's elevated itself beyond the errors that can occur in a laboratory, even with the best laboratories that are out there. The findings and corrective actions are part of the laboratory process, and I'd hate to see these bleed into citations and threats of revocation.
Okay, thank you. And you certainly hit on the intent with the persistent or frequent violations, and so something to definitely consider. Thank you.
Mindy Boley again. So I received a comment that a lot of the reasoning in this with citations is that it's actually already in several sections of the Health and Safety Code with 100850 and 100865C. And so we're just reiterating what's already in the Health and Safety Code in this regulation. And is that needed to then have all the reasons when you already have in the Health and Safety Code, you already have full support and full authority granted through there to have it duplicated in here. So that was just a comment that was brought up to me that, and a couple of those, they're saying the parts that are and we'll send it all in with exact numbers, but that there's certain sections that are actually in conflict to parts of the Health and Safety Code also. So just something to look at on that.
I think what we have in our statute is just broad authority to issue citations whenever there's a violation of the statute or the regulations or any other requirement. And so what the intent is here is to really identify for the labs those things that we would consider pretty egregious. And I think that's the intent here. It's introducing that section. It says it shall include. So this isn't a complete identification of all those things that we could issue a citation for. But we thought it was important, I think Jacob said this, in creating regs, we really want to create what those expectations are. And so even though the statute gives us broad authority, it was, we thought, helpful, and you guys can weigh in on that, for us to identify those kind of things that we think would be citation worthy.
Thank you.
Diane Anderson, Apple Labs, Clovis. I'm going to agree completely with Stephen and Mindy, but I'd also like to add number 14 from 64816.05, a laboratory fails to comply with any other provision of these regulations. That's pretty broad. And I'd like to point out, because apparently I like dead horses, that if the laboratory fails to comply with the analytical method, the water methods are prescriptive, so we can't, but the other methods are not prescriptive. We have to comply with our SOPs, but not necessarily with the methods themselves.
Hi, Jacob. This is Josie again, City of Davis. This section listed all the reasons why a certification can be revoked and accreditation taken out and how to reapply for it. But it does not include an appeal process from laboratories that have their certificate suspended or revoked.
That's in the statute.
So is it possible to include that in here, saying for the appeal process, see statute
No.
XYZ?
I think because it's in the statute, everything in the statute stands alone. And then these sections in the regulations help to give more procedure and information about some of those very vague parts of the statute. the sections for the revocation and suspension are pretty detailed. They were revised, I think, in the last year or the year before. So they're pretty detailed in terms of the process.
All right, thank you.
Adam Borchard with the Association of California Water Agencies. Echoing the previous commenters, it definitely would be helpful to have some sort of clarity what's citation worthy and then what's worthy of suspension revocation. Additionally, in 64816.05 and .1, let me get the right section subdivision. And .05, it's A10 and .1 A12. What defines consistent errors? I think that would be important to have either a definition or some clarifying language for what constitutes consistent. Thank you.
Hi, this is Raji from City of Roseville. Could you please give us the statute where the appeal information is so we can look into it?
Sure. Just a second.
And I'd just like to add, this is Christine Sotelo. The appeal process is consistent with the entire Water Board's appeal process for all other programs and divisions.
Okay, it's 100910. So that's for suspension. And then 100915 is for a temporary suspension.
Yeah, 910A talks about suspension or revocation.
Let me find where it then. There's also then a 100920.5. Then after 30 days of that decision, then you could. There's not an appeal process back to the board because the suspension and the revocation hearings go before the board. So that's a final board decision. So then there's a court, you can follow up with the court if you wanted to. So there's not a separate appeal process because it's already going before the board.
In these comments also, I have the Health and Safety Code 100880 talks about where citations are written in detailed descriptions of findings. And then also 100851 B and C, which have suspension information listed on it. And then 100905 of the safety code also talks about suspensions and offenses on that one. So just, these were ones with notes that I got. So if that helps with anybody with other numbers also.
Okay, just kind of going back and then opening it up to any comments on Article 1 through 7 that you may have been sitting on or waiting to give, and now you want to make those. We'll now entertain those.
Stephen Clark, Pacific Eco-Risk. Just a quick question for clarification from this morning, Jacob. You gave a timeline and an indication when the item would go before the board and discuss that written responses to comments would apply. But from what I understood from that timeline and when those written responses to comments would apply is for those that, so for those that are submitting written comments on this, we're not going to get a response. We would get a response if we're not satisfied with those changes and what goes before the board, and then we submit a response then through the normal clerk process. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, understood. I just want to make sure I kind of grasp it. And then when we'd realize whether or not comments heard today, either but for you guys writing down or written comments submitted, were accepted is when you release the draft that will go, or the version that will go before the board. And okay, thank you.
No, thank you for vocalizing that and putting that in your words, because sometimes we've said that and, you know, maybe somebody else heard what you said and they'll understand it more or better than we said. So thank you.
I was just confused. It had nothing to do with you. It's just like I was watching that and what comments, and we've submitted so many comments. So I just wanted to make sure I understood what our process would be for expecting when to see potential further changes, and then through the standard clerk process, response to the clerk for the forthcoming submittal to the board. Thank you.
So we did follow up. We heard a comment that people who had gotten memberships didn't get their Tni requirements. So the membership was free, but then you still had to purchase the Tni requirements from NELAC. So I think the fee was $195. I'm sorry? Oh, you purchased it? Oh, okay. Okay. So those who got the free membership, you still have to purchase the requirement. But it's a discounted rate.
And then for a period of time,
this
it was
time.
actually free. And that ended October 20th, 2016. But you can still get a free 6-month membership until the board adopts our regulations.
Stephen Garner, California, Nevada, EWWA, and I'm seeking additional clarity on that appeal processes, and I appreciate the citations of where the statutes are, but I heard suspension, revocation, temporary suspension. Does denial and citations have an appeal process? Are they included in those others?
Yeah, those are all separate. So there's when you have an accreditation and there's maybe an on-site inspection or some sort of investigation, and they decide that they need to suspend or revoke your accreditation, there's a process that they go through, and it's in front of the board, and there's a hearing. And at the end of that, you could, appeal that to the court.
Right.
If you apply for accreditation and you are denied, there is an appeal process through the board, which is separate. And
Not a part of the 910 or 915.
right.
Okay.
And then as far as citations, I believe that it's a similar petition process, but I would have to double check.
Okay.
Christine's saying, yeah, and that's in our statute.
Okay. I just was jotting down notes and I didn't see anything that tied to those two, and I thought, what are
Yeah,
they?
no, there are.
Others may already, in the room may already be well familiar with those statutes, but I'm less so, okay.
And afterwards, I could give you those citations if you wanted.
All right, appreciate it, thanks.
I can comment. I just found it right here for denial. The section Health and Safety Code section 100.855 allows for a petition for reconsideration when there's a denial.
Mindy Boley, City of Vacaville. On number 64802.15 for fields of accreditation. On B, we specifically, and by we, I mean us collaboratively, all of us together, lay out the Title 22 sections and everything with requirements for, the 40 CFR parts, 141, whatnot, which all pertain to drinking water. Is there a reason that we're not spelling out specifically, like for the wastewater with, the part 136, or why do we have a key focus just on the drinking water part, but not all the other portions that ELAP covers that, for a lot of us that do wastewater as well, we're under very strict guidelines there for our wastewater regs, just as much as we are for our drinking water. So I just found that interesting that it's only drinking water.
I guess in part because it was the Division of Drinking Water who offered this language for us to put in. We made that offer to other state agencies, not only here, but in terms of the reporting requirements, and we didn't get feedback from the others.
I understand many of you may still be formalizing your comments. I did have one more slide, one more slide just to kind of go through, and please feel free to continue to, jot down your comments and we can kind of come back to this. But in the meantime, I did want to talk about the next steps. Following the close of the public comment period, which was scheduled for January 18, 2019, ELAP will move forward with preparing the draft rulemaking package, and as I mentioned, it includes a number of elements such as the proposed draft regulation text, the initial statement of reasons, and the economic and fiscal impact statement. We expect to enter into the formal rulemaking process later in this first quarter of 2019. And just to let everyone know that the future information regarding the rulemaking process will be communicated through the email subscription, announcement section on the ELAP website, and also through the ELAP regulations homepage. Kind of going back to maybe this slide here, Stephen, that you have brought up. Again, just kind of gives again, these dates are subject to change, but they give you kind of an idea of the process moving forward. And it should be noted that there are several more opportunities for the public to come together and provide your comments, and then just lays out the rest of the timeline and process for the rulemaking portion.
Adam Borcher with the Association of California Water Agencies. Couple questions that are more, I guess, universal. They do relate to Articles 1 and 2. The first one is at the December 13th LTAC meeting, LTAC voted to create, I believe it's a QMS, an alternative accreditation subcommittee to explore either drafting or creating an alternative accreditation standard. Curious how that would fit in with the timeline you proposed, that you showed on the slide. And in light of that, in light of the fact that this third preliminary regulatory text and the last one before we go to the formal rulemaking process was released in December 18th, and we had the holidays, and some of the commenters mentioned that they were just able to convene and provide or get their stakeholders together to really take a first deep dive at the third preliminary text, if it would be possible to request a 2-week extension. That seems reasonable in light of the LTAC subcommittee's efforts, and then the fact that this is the third round before the formal rulemaking process. You have the workshop today. A lot of information was presented. Probably some additional questions got raised. You have the workshop tomorrow, and then according to your schedule, end of public comment is on Friday. So it seems like perhaps a 2-week request or 2-week extension of the public comment period would be reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. And Adam, thank you very much for bringing that up. I did forget to include that here in the slides, is that actually not tomorrow, but on Thursday, we will be convening in Los Angeles for another round of the same presentation and workshop with the laboratory community in Southern California.
I was just going to answer Adam's question real quick. So if you want to go back to that slide where we are, kind of where we're going. So we're going to be having a public comment period after we begin the, once we release the notice of publication, it's going to begin a 45-day public comment period, and then there will also be a public hearing during that time period during a State Water Board workshop, and that would be an opportunity for that alternative to be given.
Thank you for that. We were making sure that we weren't just spending time working on it that's not going to get worked in anywhere. Knowing that your next workshop is on Thursday, which, I mean, I don't know about anybody else here, not to speak for other people in the room, your answers and the way you presented things today clarified a couple of questions for me, or how I want to rework my comments. I have a feeling the people down in Southern California are going to have that same thing, but getting done at, say, you know, even if it's 3 o'clock or whatever on Thursday afternoon, to be able to then have time to put all that into a legible comment back to you, anything that they've clarified or more questions that have come up or rewording ideas, does seem like a very short period of time. So I, you know, second the request to maybe do a 2-week extension to get these comments in, just so that people have time to really work through after the workshop, so they can talk about it more with, well, wait, he said this, not this. So does that change that we don't need to comment on this, and not burden you with other comments that maybe we've already kind of come up with on our own, or that we haven't been able to, you know, group together as an organization. So I think it would be beneficial and maybe a little bit less work for you guys in the long run to actually give us more time, because things will be put together better and more legible and coherent than some of the stuff we've tried really quickly to get together in a short amount of time. So thank you.
Thank you again, Debbie Webster, Civiqua. I would also reiterate what was said about the time frame. There were a couple and I'm sorry for not doing it before you went through this process, of just kind of general comments too that I'd like to add. First has to do with the state agency partners. And in this new round of regulations in the area of ELAP, this is a whole new organization that's carrying a lot of weight with ELAP, are having decisions that, though they're not in statute or areas, kind of a closed and not open and transparent process or understanding. They will have a huge impact on the program and what will and will not be regulated and decisions. And for that reason, we really feel like, to the extent that the state agency partners are making a decision or having discussions in regard to ELAP or providing the information that you guys are needing, that needs to be an open and transparent process. It needs to be something that's noticed. It needs to be something that the public can participate in, because it is, in the end, impacting us and our communities. So just one area there. We also, as you know, we have joined with our other Clean Water Summit partners in recommending an alternative approach. We want to make sure that there's a time frame and that is considered in this process. We support the development of that, and for it to go through and have the time for LTAC and others to be able to provide comments on it. This is something that's not new. We've been trying to work this into the process, and so I think it's just really important that it gets done. And then finally, it just, as you're presenting in the end, I think for the general public and for those to understand what's in existing, what's not in existing, you did some reorganizing, and therefore you had wholesale red line versions of things because it just got moved. And so if there's a way that you can present that in the public draft comment, of whether it's by different color or some other way, because I know it's just more of a shifting rather than a change, it would help. It would help a lot. There's so much cross-referencing that needs to be done. And then finally, again, is I really recommend that those, for any regulations that you have to purchase, at least through the public comment period, that those be publicly available for review, and in multiple locations, and preferably even electronically.
Any other final comments from the group here?
Hi, Jacob. I guess we're still waiting for your final answer for the 2-week extension request. Thank you.
Oh, you know, we have always been open to all of your comments and suggestions. I think, you know, it's something that we have to consider, look at our timelines and see where we're at and consider when we get back, you know, to the office. And so, but I will point out, you know, I mean, we've always been open to every suggestion and comment that you guys have given. I mean, I think initially we proposed one workshop, and, you know, based on your feedback, we're having 2 workshops, you know, and so where we can, we absolutely will, you know, take those comments, recommendations. I mean, it's just a matter of going back, looking at our timelines, looking at our, you know, things on our end, and seeing what we can do to accommodate that. That would be my response. I mean, I don't know if I would just kind of say hold tight. We'll try to get you some more information in as timely as manner as we can. If there are no more comments, I just want to personally thank you on behalf of myself, the team here. Thank you to Christine and Kim for being here, and to all of you especially. I mean, we really can't express enough how valuable the comments have been, and we hope that you've really seen that as in the various drafts as we've kind of evolved and kind of gone through this process. So thank you for your attendance and participation. and we'll continue to make this a collaborative and a collaborative process. Thank you very much.